And if you haven't seen the film Fiddler on the Roof, who has seen Fiddler on the Roof? Who has not yet seen it? You will learn more from watching that film than I can teach you in a week. It's just a lovely film. But one of the key themes is tradition. And Tevye the milkman says, without our traditions, our lives would be as shaky as a fiddler on the roof, which is the name of the film. See that he is asked at the beginning, why do Jewish people always cover their heads when they pray? And he says, you may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you, I don't know. So even when we talk about what Jewish people believe, I don't know how it is in your culture, but many of us do things without really knowing why we do it. It's just tradition. And in Jewish life, tradition is very important. We have two main cultural groupings in the Jewish people worldwide, which is the Ashkenazi, let's say that together. Ashkenazi. Which is the Hebrew word for north, Ashkenaz, which refers to Russia and Poland and Lithuania and Eastern Europe, the north. And the Ashkenazi, my family are also German Jewish, so they are mainly Ashkenazi, although my grandmother was a Sephardi as well, from Russia and Poland and North Europe. So our culture has developed living in Europe, where it's cold and wet, and where we speak German and Russian and Yiddish, a combining of Hebrew and Latin and German and French and bits of other languages as well. And so our culture is very recognizable as European culture. If you go to an Ashkenazi restaurant, you will have typical European food. Beetroot soup called borscht, and sausages called Viennas, and heavy rice pudding called Lokshen pudding. Now, I know that with my Asian friends, we talk a lot about food, don't we? And food is very important for giving identity. So we call this material culture. And ethnographers talk a lot about how we eat and how we love to discuss what we eat. And this is one of the ways that Jewish identity is handed down. My wife knows that the best chopped liver was made by her grandmother. So whenever she has chopped liver, wherever it is, she compares it to her grandmother's chopped liver. And this is part of our identity forming as well. And I love Jewish food. So different liturgy, we have a different way of pronouncing Hebrew. Very nasal, very guttural. It's oi, 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 like that. And it's a different type of pronunciation to the way most Israelis pronounce Hebrew, which is more of a Sephardi pronunciation. So different pronunciation of Hebrew. And we are also a lachrymose culture. You know, we are tearful because we have suffered. So for Ashkenazi, we go, oi, 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 oi. Can we all practice that, please? With your hands. And you have to use your hands. Oi, 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 oi. And this is why we talk with our hands. And we express ourselves. And the Ashkenazi experience of living in Europe is worse than living under the Muslims. The Sephardis lived under the Muslims in Africa and Spain, and they were well treated. But unfortunately, our experience of living with the Christians in Europe, even in Britain, was not so good. So we express our pain, oi, 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 like that. And we have an Ashkenazi chief rabbi, although he's now retired, who's dressed like a Polish businessman of the Middle Ages. So you will see the black hats and the black coats and the Hasidic Jews. This is really Ashkenazi merchant style from the 16th and 17th centuries. And this is being modest. So you people wearing colours and buttons, this is vanity. If you should be modest and sober as the Bible requires, you should be dressed in dark colours, without fashion. This is not of God. But for the Hasidic, that's the dress style now. Now the Sepharad is the Hebrew for Spain. Let's say that together. Sepharad. So Sephardi is the group who when the exile after the destruction of the temple in AD 70, the Jews were scattered from the land of Israel. They were already in the diaspora in the Roman world, and even as far as India, and maybe even as far as China. And so they were scattered, and the North African group in Spain, Portugal and North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, were well treated by the Muslims. So they were more established, they were less persecuted, and they were more scholarly because they were allowed to be senior leaders in the courts of the Muslim rulers. And they were also able to look after their own communities and help them with their community affairs to survive. And now, in fact, they were less successful economically in Israel. So in Israel, you have a curious mixture. When I go to Israel, people know I'm an Ashkenazi. You're liberal, you're Western, you're intellectual, you're too cultured. We just get on with it. And the Sephardi tended to be more the working class group, and the Ashkenazi tended to be more the intellectuals. And then there's a curious mix, because as well as Ashkenazi and Sephardi, you have Russian immigrants, you have Ethiopian immigrants, you have people from all over the world. So it's a real mixture. But in Israel, they tended to be less successful economically, but they know how to have a party. And they have nice spicy food that's very healthy. Hummus and pitta. And if you go to a Sephardi restaurant, it's nice food that doesn't make you too fat. And we know how to, if you're Sephardi, you need to know how to have a party. So instead of, oi, 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 you go, ay, 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 ay. Can we try that, please? Ay, 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 ay. But Sephardi then is, ay, 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 ay. And Ashkenazi is, oi, 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 oi. That's right. But of course, Sephardi and Ashkenazi have now combined. Because when the State of Israel came into being again in 1948, you have waves of immigration from all these different countries, and we mix the cultures up. So it's funny, as soon as you leave your home country, Britain, to become an Israeli, people say, you're an English Israeli, or a French Israeli, or a Moroccan Israeli, or an Indian Israeli, and all the cultures still come back. And we celebrate them differently in Israel. So that gives you a sort of cultural feel, and you can see even the chief rabbi from the Sephardi group, he looks more oriental, doesn't he? He's dressed in colour, not black and white. And Sephardi lifestyle is much more colourful in many ways. And the great rabbis were from the Sephardi lifestyle. Now I need to count. Religious groupings. 2 Jews, how many opinions? A lot. So we are now looking at the key religious groups. And the first group are what's called Ultra-Orthodox. Now Orthodox means right belief, orthodoxe. But I think I've got the right belief. So even to use this label is assuming something. And if the right belief is to believe in Jesus as Messiah, it's not really that orthodox. It's zeal without knowledge. But the ultra-orthodox are the word Hasidim. Let's say that together. Hasidim. That means pious. Very devoted to God. So the ultra-orthodox are the people in the black hats and the black suits, and the women will have a wig to cover their hair. and they will dress very modestly. Their arms will be covered. They will not wear jeans, and they will be in a particular style of modesty, which is very important. And this gentleman here, does anybody know who he is? He was a famous rabbi of one of these groups who died 20 years ago. And his disciples, some of them, even believed that he might be the Messiah. So some of them even pray by his graveside to say he's going to rise from the dead. And they have almost taken the Christian view of Jesus, the suffering servant who suffers for the sins of the people or the humanity, and said this is what our rabbi, Menachem Schneerson, is doing. And so yesterday I'm in Tel Aviv and I'm speaking to the group there, and over the road there is a man with a poster with this rabbi on it saying, Yechi HaMelech HaMashiach, may the King Messiah come, or let him be the King Messiah, because they still believe that their rabbi is either the one who brings the Messiah or could be the Messiah in our generation. And Hasidic Jews have a doctrine of the Messiah that there might be a Messiah in every generation. Then we have the Orthodox. And this was the former chief rabbi of the British United Synagogue, the largest group of Orthodox Jews in this country, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Lord Sachs. Now he was knighted and everything else. A philosopher from Cambridge University, who is also very profoundly Jewish and a scholar of Judaism and an Orthodox Jew. But he, as a scholar and as a thinker, who is very popular on the British media, often on the radio programme, would be helping non-Jews understand Jewish wisdom and Jewish thought. And he would also be helping Jewish people to understand their own beliefs in a modern way, modern philosophical way. So Orthodox Jews today, and by Orthodox I mean people who accept the written law, the Hebrew Bible, and the oral law, the law that is passed down by word of mouth. I'll come back to that in a minute. Basically, you keep the Sabbath strictly, you keep kosher food, you practice festivals, you do not marry non-Jews, you keep a Orthodox lifestyle. And I'll come back to that. Now, in America and in Israel, and also here in the UK, there is another group called conservative. And you say, what is the difference between Orthodox and conservative? And the answer is basically this, that conservatives have a more modern philosophy, a more liberal understanding, but they still live a very traditional lifestyle. Now in America, the conservatives are bigger than the Orthodox, and the Reform, the next one, is even bigger than that. I was taught by this man when I was studying my master's studies in Hebrew Bible, in Hebrew and Jewish studies. A wonderful scholar of Jewish wisdom, but also quite modern in some ways. So that's conservative. This will probably confuse you if you haven't looked at this already. All of these are different groups who have developed. Here's the next one, Reform. In the USA, which we call liberal here in the UK, and the senior rabbi of the largest liberal synagogue is this lady here, who's my cousin. So when my cousin and I were growing up, and I became a missionary and my cousin became a rabbi, my grandmother used to say, I know that one of you is probably right, but I don't know which one. And so if you go into central London near Lord's cricket ground, you know there's a large cricket ground, on the other side of the road is the liberal Jewish synagogue of St. John's Wood, and my cousin there is the senior rabbi. And you say, well, how do you get on with each other? Very well. In fact, I helped her with her master's thesis, and we do a lot of family things together. And after 40 years of being a believer in Jesus, they know what I'm like. So if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. But we always sit down and discuss theology. And we are actually very similar in our political views, in our family values, and I think even in some of our understanding of God. So liberal Jews in this country, Reform in the States, are actually very humanist. They have women rabbis, not just men. Some of them have same-sex partnerships, gay and lesbian. Some of them are very liberal as regards scripture. And some of them do not believe in a personal Messiah. But in America, this is the largest denomination. So my brother in Phoenix, Arizona, he says to me, I go to the Reform synagogue religiously every month to play poker, to play a card game. Now, this is shocking to Christians who expect that Jews will be very religious and based on the Bible. But if you really feel called to work amongst Jewish people, you have to know the reality. So I'm sorry if I'm shocking you, but it is the reality. And from this group are people who are finding Jesus. Many Christians think, I'm going to be a witness to the Jews, I must go just to the Orthodox. But one principle in mission is win the winnable. Yes, we should preach the gospel in season and out of season to everyone. But many Reformed Jews are much more tolerant and open to the gospel. So you have Reform, and then you have a large number, maybe in this country 40%, who say, I'm just Jewish. I'm not that religious. And my wife said this, I'm just Jewish. And that goes very deep. When her two Christian friends were sharing the gospel with her, even though she's brought up in a traditional Jewish home, her mother kept a kosher home, she didn't really believe in God, and she said, I'm just Jewish. And that goes very deep. And that is the challenge for us sharing our faith with Jewish friends, that it's a strong sense of identity, even if it's not based on a religious commitment. Non-religious Jewishness. And who is this lady here? Helen Shapiro, a Jewish pop singer. Have you heard of the Beatles? The Beatles were her support group when she started. A very popular sort of Jewish figure who then became a believer in Jesus. So she is a Messianic Jew. She's still around doing a lot to serve the Lord today as a Jewish believer in Jesus. Are you with me so far? Let's think about how these different groups emerged.